2023 was supposed to mark the beginning of a true rebuild for the Houston Texans. Now, after they fired head coach Lovie Smith, and because he left a parting gift in the form of purposely winning the last game of the 2022 season, that caused them to lose out on the first overall pick in the 2023 draft, the Texans went on to hire former 49ers defensive coordinator Demeco Ryans. And Demeco was quickly tasked with restoring the team from the ground up. And the Texans, they went on to have a very active offseason last year that included getting the quarterback that they wanted, despite not having the number 1 overall pick. And that quarterback was by the name of CJ Stroud from Ohio State at number 2 overall. But they weren't finished there yet. They went on to trade back immediately into the 3rd overall pick. They traded from the Arizona Cardinals, and they went on to get an edge rusher by the name of Will Anderson from Alabama. So they got their 2 key pieces on both sides of the ball after an aggressive first round in that draft. And now that they have their 2 key pieces on both sides of the ball, a new head coach, it was now a matter of time of how the Texans were going to perform in year 1 of this rebuild. So when you look at the Texans in this past year, they didn't really get off to a great start at 0-2, which, it was expected with this young core, but they picked up steam over the next month or so. CJ Stroud started coming into his own while picking up wins over the likes of the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Pittsburgh Steelers, the New Orleans Saints. And assisting me in this growth was a supporting cast of receiver Nico Collins and then breakout rookie Tank Dell, Steven Sims, and Dalton Schultz. So this supporting cast that looked like a nobody cast, it actually started really doing really well for this rookie quarterback and for the entire team as a whole. Defensively, they still had plenty of flaws, but under Demeco's leadership and a couple of veterans, the defense took a step forwards with the mix of, like I said, veterans and youth. The likes of Will Anderson, Jonathan Greenard, Malik Collins formed a pretty good front, while the back end of Derek Stingley, safety Jimmy Ward, and the late season addition of Kareem Jackson, they made a very decent core for this defense. And what do you combine that with? Well, by late season, the Texans were a young and unexpected growing group that, even with some of the key losses that they suffered during the season, they had a key point. They had a path towards making the playoffs. Like they were like, nobody predicted that they were gonna make the playoffs in 2023. Like I said, this was supposed to be a rebuilding year for the Houston Texans. But once you get towards the end of the season, it was a win in game compared to 2022, towards the end of 2022, where both of these teams are just between the Colts and the Texans. They're battling for a top draft pick spot in the draft. But this past season, they were battling for a playoff spot. Like, no joke. These teams were a year prior, like I said, battling for a top 5 draft pick. And then this past season, they're battling to try to get into the playoffs. But in the end, it was the Texans that came out on top over their division rival. And not only did they get a playoff spot, they got something even better than that. The AFC South. They got the AFC South in major thanks to their other division rival at the bottom, the Titans. They upset the Jaguars the next day because the Jaguars, well, blame Tony Khan. No, I'm just kidding. The Titans upset the Jaguars the next day, and the Texans are AFC South champions. They made a good amount of history within the span of 2 weeks, going on to win the division and their playoff game against the Browns at home in runaway fashion, as they became the first team in NFL history to do such with a rookie quarterback and a rookie head coach. Pretty insane how 1 year is like a change, like a complete 180 for Houston compared to like the last couple of years for them. Unfortunately, what went wrong for them? Well, they did suffer some key injuries late in the season that did end up affecting them in their next playoff game. Like Stroud's top receiver in Tank Dell, he suffered a fractured fibula in week 13 in that it was the Denver game. while safety Jimmy Ward was also gone from that game due to an aggravated hamstring injury. So some of these injuries late in the season, like back in December, they started piling on, and it started becoming pivotal as the playoffs started rolling on. The Stroud also lost Noah Brown in the receiving game to a torn ACL in that wild card game. So combine that with a lot of missed opportunities, inexperience. When you get to the divisional game against the Baltimore Ravens, it just was too much to overcome, especially for a quarterback like CJ Stroud. Sure, he has a lot of promise, but he just wasn't at that point quite yet. And that led to their demise in Baltimore. They also had, like I said, deficiencies in certain areas still, like corner, defensive line, offensive line, among other areas in their young core. So the Texans, it didn't end the way that they wanted to. They were hoping to go on a very surprise run in the AFC Championship game, but they ended their season like nobody expected them to. 10-7. Many were expecting a rebuild. AFC South champions yet. And they went on to go on to the divisional playoffs. Not certainly an AFC championship game quite yet, but the future of this Texans team, I believe it's going to be very bright for them. Probably much brighter than the days of the Deshaun Watson era under center. But if they want to get to that ultimate goal, which is their first ever Super Bowl, and actually, one step behind that, their first ever AFC championship game, there's work to be done. There's work to be done to build around this young core. And man, so far, they're putting in a lot of work in this offseason. So when you look at this offseason so far for the Texans, there's around $70 million to spend prior to the start of free agency. They did have a first-round pick in this upcoming NFL draft. Why do I say did? Well, they did have the 23rd overall pick from Cleveland. And they also did have an actual first-round pick in the 27th pick, but that got traded to the Cardinals because of the trade up that they did last year because of the Will Anderson deal. And recently, the 23rd pick that they got from Cleveland, they since traded away to the Minnesota Vikings for their 42nd and 188th pick in this year's draft, as well as a second-round pick in next year's draft. So they basically have no first-round pick in this year's draft. So General Manager Nick Caserio is going to have to make that 42nd pick count since he no longer has a first-round pick in this year's draft. So looking at some of the key free agents, edge rusher Jonathan Greenard and linebacker Blake Cashman, they went to the Minnesota Vikings. Defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins, he went to the Cincinnati Bengals. Offensive lineman George Fant, he went to the Seattle Seahawks. Devin Singletary, who had a decent late season push, he signed with the Giants. Adrian Amos and Kareem Jackson, they remain unsigned. Dalton Schultz, Kaimi Fairbairn, and Noah Brown. So looking at the moves that they already made, that being the Texans, they did manage to re-sign Schultz and Kaimi Fairbairn to 3-year deals. They also re-signed Noah Brown. And they also traded for the running back, Joe Mixon from the Bengals, in return for a 7th-round pick. So not too bad for Houston. They get a solid running back, and they hope to get some glory day production from Joe Mixon. And to replace Jonathan Greenard, they signed Danielle Hunter from the Minnesota Vikings, and they also got some more help on the defensive end as well. Defensive tackle Danico Autry from the Tennessee Titans, and linebacker Azeez Al-Shaair, a former player under Demeco Ryans. So that Texans defense is going to be certainly one to watch next year. So some of the things that they still need to address this offseason is, well, still staying with the defense. The safety position. The Texans still have to address that spot. They either have to decide on re-signing Adrian Amos or Kareem Jackson. So maybe they're still waiting it out. Or they can go on the route of drafting one to help out Jimmy Ward, because Jimmy Ward can't do it all by himself. He needs some help. And then on the offensive side of the ball, they have to add some help alongside the offensive line, because as the season wore on, with the injuries piling up, it was apparent that the offensive line was really struggling. So they should use at least 2 of their draft picks, if not 3, to find some upgrades up front for CJ Stroud, notably at right tackle and left guard. Or maybe if you have better spots for them, let me know. So for the Houston Texans, this was supposed to be a rebuilding year for them in 2023, but man, they rebuilt much faster than many expected. Getting a playoff spot, winning the division, this was not on their bingo card. Nobody's bingo card when the season started. So this team, I'm actually pretty excited to see them in 2024. They got a very good quarterback in CJ Stroud, very good head coach in Demeco Ryans, and these young Texans, they have a very bright future ahead of them. And I know the AFC South would be a competitive division in 2024, at least, 3/4 of it. And if the Texans keep adding the right pieces this offseason and CJ Stroud has a very good second year, they could be in their very first AFC Championship game this fall.